All right, today we're solving absolute value equations. So first, a reminder on what absolute value means. I'm going to zoom in over here. You can or cannot write this down, up to you. Absolute value, if I write maybe the absolute value of 4 with the straight lines on each side of 4, that is asking me the distance that 4 is from 0. So 4 is 4 numbers away on a number line from 0. So the answer to that would be 4. If I said the absolute value of -3, it's asking me how far away is -3 from 0 on a number line. And -3 is 3 numbers away from 0 on a number line. So you'll notice that no matter if we have a positive number or a negative number, we are getting a positive answer because distance away from 0 can be positive. It has to be positive. You can be 3 to the left or 3 to the right, but you're still positive 3 away. So that's going to be important for us to keep in mind as we solve these equations. So one more thing. Let's say that I had the absolute value of something, but I knew I wanted the answer to be 7. That is saying, what could you put in here that is 7 away from 0? Well, there's more than one thing. You could be at 7, or you could be at -7. You could be either place, and you would still be 7 away from 0 on a number line. So we're going to have possibly multiple answers for our equations today. Let's start looking at some of those. We have our blurb from the textbook up here, talking about exactly what we just said, but using a bit more variables instead. In our key concept box, it says to solve an equation where the absolute value of something is b, we need to solve it so that a, the thing inside, could be b or -b. And that's for the reason we just said. If we look at our first example, we can see what it's talking about here. So the absolute value of y is 36. So it's saying, what is 36 away from 0? That's going to be your answer. Well, y could be 36, or y could be -36. We don't know. Could be either. Could be both. One or the other. So if I move to the next one, how this is similar is it says m plus 3 equals 7. So the distance that m plus 3 is from 0 is 7 away. So m plus 3 could be at 7. So I'm going to write m plus 3 could be 7, because then the absolute value would be 7. Or m plus 3 could be -7, because the absolute value of -7 is also 7. So we have to solve them both. So it's similar to one of those inequalities that has an or, where we solve two things. So I subtract 3. My first answer could be 4, or I subtract 3 over here, and my second answer would be -10. So m could be 4 or m could be -10. Both would make this equation true. I can double check. I can do 4 plus 3 absolute value equals 7. That gives me absolute value of 7 equals 7, and that's correct. Over here, I'd have -10 plus 3 absolute value is 7. That gives me the -7 absolute value is 7, and that is correct. So I'm done with that one. Both answers I have there. Let's look at another one. This one, same deal. The inside could be positive 18 to get an answer 18, or it could be -18. So 4n minus 5 could be 18, or 4n minus 5 could be -18. And I'll solve them both. Adding 5 over here, I get 4n is 23. Divide by 4. I'm going to leave mine as a fraction, 23 over 4. Or, over on the right, adding 5, 4n could be -13. Dividing by 4, n could be -13 over 4. Either of those answers would solve my problem. Let's look at our last one over here. This is the first one where there's something else happening. There's a negative sign in front. We do not get to combine this negative sign with the absolute value. You might be tempted to distribute it in, but we cannot do that. That is not okay. These are not parentheses, so it does not work as distributing. The other way that we could get rid of this negative sign is we think of it like a -1, and it says -1 multiplied by this absolute value. So to get rid of multiplication, we will divide by -1 to make that go away, because it can't be there. I don't know how to deal with it if it's there. Once it's gone, it would say the absolute value of x plus 1 is +3. This I know how to deal with. X plus 1 could be 3 and get the answer 3, or x plus 1 could be -3 and get the answer 3. So I'll write it both ways. X plus 1 is +3, or x plus 1 is -3. And now I'll solve them both. Subtract 1 from everything, and x is either 2 or x is -4. So we had to get rid of the extra negative sign out front by dividing before we could split up our problem into 2 parts and solve it on that one. Let's look at a few more on the back. On the back, we have more problems where there is extra stuff. So on this first one, the extra stuff is an added 5. So I need to get rid of that first. So I subtract 5. So now it says x minus 1 absolute value equals -3. You're probably already splitting this up into 2 parts and writing it twice, but I need you to stop, because this is not going to be one that we split up into 2 parts. This says that x minus 1 is -3 away from 0. You can't be -3 away from 0. You can be 3 to the left or 3 to the right, but it's still +3. Because you've gotten it to where it's just the absolute value bars and it equals a negative number, that's not possible. So this is going to be no solution. You have to get it down to the just absolute value first before you can make that decision, though. If we had started this problem, we couldn't have decided then. Let's look at the next one and see if it has a solution. I see, wow, lots of extra stuff over here. So the first thing that I'm going to do is get rid of the subtracted 2 by adding 2 on both sides. Then I will have -10 absolute value 14 minus r equals -5. I need to get rid of the -10 now. It's multiplied in the front, so I will divide it away. Then I will have 14 minus r in absolute value is equal to 1/2, or 0.5. This means that 14 minus r could be at 0.5, or it could be at -0.5, so I have to write it both ways. 14 minus r is 0.5, or 14 minus r is -0.5. If I subtract 14 from everything, I will have that -r is at -13.5, or -r is at -14.5, which if I divide everything by -1, gets me that r is 13.5, or r is 14.5. And I probably should have left myself a little bit more room for those 2 answers, but it could be one or the other. Let's look at our last question here. It says, remember that absolute value represents distance from 0 on a number line. Distance is always non-negative or positive. So any equation that states that the absolute value is negative has no solutions. So this is referring to the problem on the left that we just did. Here's our last one. I see a -6 in front, and it cannot be there. It's multiplied, so I will divide it away. Then it says absolute value of 10 minus 2x equals -4. Well, we're not allowed to have an absolute value equal to -4, because you can't be -4 away from 0. So I get to stop and say that this has no solutions, and then we would be done. There's one more example that isn't on here that it might be good if it was, and it would say, how about x plus 5 in absolute value minus 4 equals -4. Let's make this our example. I need to get rid of a subtracted 4 first, so I need to add 4 on both sides. Then it would say the absolute value of x plus 5 equals 0. Now this says that x plus 5 is 0 away from 0. That's possible. You would be 0 away from 0 only if you were actually at 0. So in this case, x plus 5 only has one possible answer. X plus 5 has to be 0 because that's the only thing that would give us the absolute value 0. So I just solved this one time and get x equals -5. So that's the third case scenario. We could have no solutions. We could have an example like this where we have one answer, or we have one that most of them had where they had 2 answers each. There's 3 options.